All right, DJ LeRoy.
NightWatchman, how you doing, buddy?
Great. How about yourself?
Not bad, not bad. I'm kind of excited about this show because we're gonna have some veterans, a lot of veterans, and also a newbie.
Okay. All right.
You
Well,
know,
he's new to us, but he's not new. he's been
that is
around.
true.
He's been around the block a little bit. We'll get into that. But we're here
Absolutely.
to talk about the legalization process of cannabis in New York. The process, for those of us who know, cannabis was legalized in March of this year. And now with a new governor in place, we're starting to see some moves in terms of the infrastructure going in place. So we wanted to talk to our panel of experts and get their opinions on where we are, what's going on, and how do we take a part of this booming opportunity.
So, NightWatchman, why don't you bring the guest on? Let's see.
Okay. So let's start out with Gia Marone, who is the head of Women Grow. She has been a tireless advocate for the proper legalization of cannabis in New York. Good evening, Gia. How are you?
Good evening, gentlemen. How are you? Thank you for having me on.
Good,
Always
good.
good to have
Yeah, absolutely,
you. Mhm.
absolutely. Who we got next?
Well, in terms of other tireless advocates, let's talk about Regina Smith, who is the executive director of Harlem Business Alliance. They have been also in the forefront of advocating and educating about uh, cannabis and the process of legalization and the creation of the business opportunities.
And
So,
NightWatchman, I have to definitely say that the HBA Harlem Business Alliance was the only organization in the community that spoke about it, spoke about the impending legislation, and that when it came online, how
mhm.
would we as Black people benefit from that?
Right. And she didn't just
Well,
whisper, she
no,
spoke and spoke often. So, how are you, Regina?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Okay.
absolutely. Mm. So now, next, of course, is can we say our doc,
That's
the
right.
one, the only?
Dr.
Uh,
Stephen Robinson,
that's right.
the head of the Society for Cannabis Clinicians, and he has been our go-to uh, guy to tell us about the medical benefits of cannabis and really just the education on that process.
Well,
Stephen,
greetings,
welcome,
everyone.
welcome.
Glad,
Greetings.
glad to be here. Glad to be
Okay.
here.
All
That's
right,
right.
and
And last
Curtis,
but
I'm
not
going to let
least,
you introduce our last guest, Curtis.
yeah, but this guy who's also, as we know now, Gia, also in Brooklyn, your neighbor. He's an attorney by training and an entrepreneur. He is the one, the only, Mr. Ronald Turner. And Ron, I didn't even know about. This is now the third time I have graduates from Wayne State University, none other than Detroit, Michigan itself. Ron Turner, welcome, buddy.
Detroit in the house. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for the welcome.
Absolutely. So, Night Watchman, you want to give the polemic?
All
Start
right,
it
well
off.
let's set the stage here. So our new governor, Kathy Hochul, she's pledged to jumpstart the marijuana legalization process. She made two key appointments to head the Cannabis Control Board, and her appointments were quickly confirmed by the New York State Senate. And so those appointments included Tremaine Wright, former New York State Assembly person, born and raised also in Brooklyn, still lives on the block that she grew up. She went to Duke undergraduate, University of Chicago Law School, and she is now chair of the New York State Cannabis Control Board. The other key appointment was Chris Alexander, the executive director of the New York State Office of Cannabis Management. He was a former policy coordinator for the Drug Policy Alliance. He was also former government relations and policy director for Bill LLC, which is a multi state cannabis operator based in Canada. And he was a former associate counsel for the New York State Senate. So, we wanted to ask our panel of experts here what your thoughts were on these appointments and what that means for a proper legalization process here in New York. So why don't we start out with Gia?
Sure. I was happy to see it. I was happy to see it because I do know Chris. I know Chris when he was with the Drug Policy Alliance. I know the work that he did, in which I'm actually still a part of the coalition, Start Smart. And I think what that shows me, as well as those working in the industry, is that, this is someone who is very serious and really understands the nuances of what it's going to take to build an infrastructure for an adult use program for our state. As well as Tremaine, I've been on panels with her as well. I don't know her as well as I've known Chris, but what I can say is that, Tremaine, as far as, when she was an assemblywoman, she was one of the few that got out there early that talked about supporting legalization. And I applauded that because at the time, and I'm talking about at least 3 years ago, it was a struggle to get any of our legislative people of color to really get behind this. And I applaud the work that she did early on, and I look forward to seeing what she'll do in this role.
Great. Regina, your thoughts?
I agree with everything that Gia said. I'm encouraged by those appointments. I'm definitely interested in seeing the additional appointees, and particularly someone who has a deep understanding of economics and finance, and who understand that how important it is that we create thousands, I'm talking about thousands, of Black entrepreneurs across the state of New York who are positioned and supported in such a fashion that they're able to make millions and billions of dollars because of the wealth gap that we have in our community, and also because of the damage, the harm, the horrendous harm that has been done to Black people over the last 50 plus years. So we need someone who thinks big, who understands that, we're talking about millions and billions of dollars. So that would be a great addition to those entities.
Great. Dr. Stephen, your thoughts?
Oh, you're muted.
Okay, thank you. Having spent most of my professional cannabis career on the West Coast in California, which was the first state in the union with legalized access to medicinal cannabis, I know just a bare amount of what I've seen in the media on the two current appointees to the Cannabis Control Board and the Office of Cannabis Management. But given that New York's legalization framework probably is the most progressive in terms of its recognition and commitment to social equity in the cannabis industry, I think these two appointments augur well in terms of New York State actually fulfilling the commitment that's outlined in the legislative language. So I'm encouraged and not discouraged by these initial appointments, and I understand there've been a couple of more as well. At least I'm encouraged. I think this is good.
Great. Ronnie, your thoughts?
It makes me feel comfortable. It makes me feel like it's I'm in the hands of pros, of people who are serious, and as an entrepreneur who is looking at all the pros and cons, I tend to look more at really the cons, the pitfalls and disadvantages. So when you see two real pros like these two appointments, leading the charge towards, bringing this to light and making it become real in New York. It just makes me feel comfortable from both a recreational, medicinal first and recreational standpoint. I think it's just important to, given the history of the plant, I'd say recent history, which has led to a lot of just trouble, incarceration and strife, and just, it has, it just hasn't been the greatest thing. So as someone who's thinking about getting involved in it, I don't know very much at all about the cannabis industry. It's just very encouraging, makes me feel safe.
Well, you know what? I want to also mention something that I know NightWatchman had brought up to me in terms of knowing stuff about the cannabis industry. You had mentioned that there was pushback on NightWatchman regarding,
Yes,
I believe, an assembly person coming out of Staten Island. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
So actually, a state senator, Diane Savino, who has been very, very involved in the legalization process, criticized the appointment of Tremaine Wright, basically saying that she was surprised Governor Hochul did not pick somebody who came from the cannabis industry, and it's basically citing that this is somebody who's inexperienced in the industry. And I thought about it a little bit, and on the surface, while it seems like it's a legitimate point to bring up, but what we also know from the development of the cannabis industry is that when they say appointment or experience in the cannabis industry, they're talking about people who were in the legal cannabis industry who are primarily white men, and I think one of the issues with this whole thing coming up is that there was a commitment to not have the cannabis industry that existed in other states, which was primarily dominated by white males, a lot of venture capital money, and very, very little diversity. And so, the people of color who've been involved, some of them have been involved in the legacy industry, and we did not expect that somebody from that background is going to be appointed to this. So I think it's a little disingenuous saying we're looking for somebody from the cannabis industry, because one of the issues, I'll ask other people's opinions on this, but my opinion is that the problems we had with Governor Cuomo to date was his cozying up to some of these large multi-state operators while basically slow playing the development of the social equity portion. And I think the idea of just how long it took for him, and he never actually came out with these appointments, and the fact that Governor Hochul is clearly sending a message, I feel, that she is supportive of a strong social equity program. So that's my thoughts on it. But let's turn it to other people and get some other opinions.
Gia, thoughts?
I don't think Diane Savino was strongly supportive of the MRTA.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think New York really got off on the best foot in terms of organizing this industry horizontally as opposed to vertically like some other states, so that with all of these different niche areas in terms of having licenses for cultivators, for processors, for delivery services, for laboratories, for consumption lounges, it allows for points of entry that are much more attainable than having the requirement for a large seed to sale operation. And so I think New York started off on a good foot with that. And it clearly in the legislation, it goes much, much further in terms of articulating its commitment to social equity its recognition of the terrible devastation that the war on drugs has had on Black and brown communities historically. And it clearly states its intent, at least, to use part of this whole burgeoning industry to rectify a lot of that privation. And so, even though Wright may not know, have the familiarity with the industry that some people from Staten Island think they have, I'm really encouraged that she had been in the past the chair of the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian caucus in the legislature, and had worked as in the director of the Office of Financial Inclusion and Empowerment. So I'm sure she's really much more familiar with those issues of historic exclusion and methods for inclusion than anybody from Staten Island would be. And I think that's important.
So can I go back to my point of why I said what I said?
Sure.
And, you know, the bill that was passed was in support of the MRTA, and exactly what the good doctor just pointed out. When you look at other states that have sourced or have pointed to social equity, what we've seen time and time again is that the appointments have often been not only challenged, but they've had to go back and reappoint new people. Or the states like New Jersey actually had to push to get a more balanced committee in place. And so while someone may say someone should have come from the cannabis industry, I think it would have been somewhat of a conflict of interest, right? Because when I look at the expertise of Tremaine as well as Chris, they both have been in roles that can speak to multiple sides of the table. And I think that perspective is key here. And then also coming from the communities that have been most impacted by it. I think it was the NightWatchman that said, yes, this is an industry that has been led by white men. And so, you know, we're looking for a change. We're looking for a different approach. And I believe the way to do that is to seriously tap those who are not only familiar with the circumstances and have worked with communities, but also have worked with businesses as well as legislators that understand what's needed to run and set up a successful program in our state.
Regina, what's your thoughts? Because certainly I know HBA was on the forefront of really talking about the inequity and the harm and damage that the war on drugs wrought to our community. And now that we're suddenly on precipice of adult use, and how our communities will literally be left out of the benefits of the industry. Your thoughts?
Well, we certainly weren't happy with Como's cannabis proposed legislation, and we have issues with the legislation that was passed. The reason being is that we feel that the people who have been most impacted, most damaged, most targeted, most terrorized by the war on drugs and the Rockefeller laws are the only ones who should receive priority in consideration as social equity applicants. Those individuals, their family members, those communities. And so we feel that there's nothing equitable about prioritizing people who weren't harmed. And so for that reason, we find the legislation to be extremely weak in that regard. And it has been weak across the nation. Every state that has legalized has not generated or benefited Black people. Applicants have been stymied in so many different ways. I mean, it's almost diabolical in certain senses, the roadblocks and the challenges that have been put up. So we are not optimistic at this point in time, because we have seen how we have been treated with the legalization of the numbers industry, where a number of people who ran numbers were helpful to entrepreneurs in the community who were trying to do certain things. And there's been recent discussions about how some of our musicians and entertainers got support, but businessmen, entrepreneurs also were able to get support from the numbers operators, as well as some of our politicians. And we saw what happened when the state took over the numbers game and with Lotto and legalized that, and it really didn't benefit Black people. We became consumers. And so what we're concerned about is Black people being in a position of being preyed upon again, and bamboozled. And so when we talk about how critical it is for the creation of thousands and thousands of Black people to get into this space, that's what we mean, and that's what needs to happen. And the fact that that the MSOs are the ones that are positioned to do seed to sale on a large scale, and they're the only ones. I mean, if you really want to have true equity, individuals who have been most harmed in those communities across the state should be given an opportunity to do seed to sale on a grand scale. So that would equalize things. I mean, they have 10, we should have 10. Not one of those MSOs is owned by an individual who has been most harmed. Not one of them is Black. Not one of them is Latino. So there are holes in this legislation. There are a lot of holes. And we've been placed in a situation where we have to compete with people who weren't harmed, women, white women in particular, farmers, white farmers who have been, they're farming. I mean, Black farmers have been disadvantaged. New York State has land trusts. What kind of programs are being put in place to benefit Black farmers and to grow them so that they can be well positioned to benefit from this legislation? I mean, there are so many things that need to be done. There's no money that has been put in place to help those individuals who want to get into this space on day one. So what we're being told to do is wait for revenues to be generated, mainly by the MSOs, and for those revenues to go into a reinvestment fund, and then maybe like 18 to 2 years from now, some of that money will trickle to our communities. And be mindful of the fact that we're going to contribute to those reinvestment funds. Those dollars are going to be come from our community, because of course Black people, Latinos, we're always targeted. I mean, for when it comes to selling any product. So let's be real about that. So we're going to contribute to the fund, and then we have to wait 18 months to 2 years in order to get some of that money, and a chunk of it is going to be allocated to the police, another to our state institutions so that they can do research, another chunk to education, and that money was supposed to come from another pot, but it's going to come from this pot of money. And then, drug, treatment, that whole sort of thing, workforce development, and maybe a few dollars here and there for small business development. I'm sorry, but I'm not, I'm not happy with the legislation, and I'm not optimistic about the prospect of us benefiting if we're not really clear, and if we don't fight like hell. We tried to get it done with the legislation, but everyone was, they were concerned about the inclusion of women and minorities who haven't been harmed. And so, that weakened the legislation, in our view. So there's no day one money to train anybody, to fund community-based organizations that have been in this space and that are dedicated to Black economic empowerment or Latino economic empowerment. That hasn't been funded. I mean, there are so many holes in the legislation. And of course, regulations are very important, but we were advised by those who have been in this space and fighting these fights for a long time that we needed to get it in the legislation, and we didn't. So hopefully it will happen with the regs, but we have a lot of work to do because we're gonna be asked out again.
Gotcha. Ron, you've heard this, yeah, and it's one thing I definitely have to give a major props to Regina for always. When we talk about MWBE legislation, she does not look at that. She looks at Black and brown businesses specifically. That's what we're talking about. So, your thoughts of what you've heard so far?
Well, first of all, I'm saying, what you doing to me, Curtis? You got me on here with these experts. No, you guys are breaking it down very, very well. I'm learning here. I can't speak to the legislation, but I can say that just from a business standpoint, normally a lack of diversity and money and power in the hands of just a few, and in the hands of a homogeneous few, normally leads to ineffectiveness, lower profits, and sometimes even corruption. So for me, I'm always going to want to see a more diverse leadership, and just the entire industry. I want to see it be very, very diverse.
Well, one of the things that, and I have
to speak to the legislative part of it.
Right, and Ron, I didn't really get into all of your background. That you are an entrepreneur looking actually for opportunity in the space, right? But definitely, and also looking at let's say states that haven't necessarily gone as far as New York State yet in terms of the whole adult use look.
Right.
And so, Dr. Robinson, Gia, I need you guys to weigh in. Let's say in states that have not yet gotten to the adult use look, should prospective entrepreneurs look to those particular states, or focus on an area like a New York, which is putting it together and is, like I said, right on the precipice of about doing it? Are there, let's say, opportunities for Black and brown entrepreneurs to invest in the space?
Well, business is certainly not my forte, and I would think that the entrepreneur has to really focus on what their assets are, what their time frame is, because in those states that have not authorized adult use, if they have medicinal cannabis, are already players in the space. And unfortunately, what we've seen is that in many cases, the state legislatures have been rather lazy about doing the conversion from medical and adult. And so those people who are on the ground already with medical sort of get grandfathered into the adult space. In terms of how well those entrepreneurs are situated, you have to start with the basic legislation. It's the legislation that, in fact, is creating the guidelines, the boundaries, the lines on the road in terms of how the industry is going to conduct itself. And unless you have a legislation that is aware of and receptive to a lot of the social justice considerations, it'll simply be economic. And you can look at a number of states that have done it like that. And in fact, Florida is an example. When they set up their even their medical channel, as flimsy as it is, they set up provisions and requirements that in order for nurseries that were going to be the grow operations for cannabis, in order for nurseries to even apply initially, they had to be in existence for 30 years and have something like 500,000 plants or seedlings already under development. And obviously, this eliminated all of the potential black farmers who wanted to apply. There's a very shady connection between the development of the Florida industry and the Congressman Matt Gaetz and his family. It was drawn up and it excluded by provision, any the participation of any black farmer until that was brought to their attention very vociferously. In terms of whether some other state versus New York, I think New York is under construction now, and it's very important that the development of this industry be watched step by step, because whatever lip service is paid to social equity, we all know that the devil is in the details. There's as the regulations are being constructed now, I'm sure that there are industry participants, the MSOs and the people who have, the long bread to hire the policy advocates and the lobbyists, are writing their version of the legislation now and putting it in the hands of the legislators and the regulators. And I think that the community advocates should do the same, particularly since they are positioned with some very receptive members of the legislature who helped put the legislation together. So entrepreneurs, I'm actually more concerned with what happens to the medical channel, because I've seen in all of these conversions from strict medical to adult use, that the medical channel often gets kicked to the curb because there's much less money involved. And I really hope that there are provisions set up within the state to prevent that.
Gotcha. Thank you. Gia, thoughts?
So it's an interesting question in terms of the investment piece. Regina said some points that I wanted to push back on, but I also agree with her. I think the difference is going to be, and just as Dr. Robinson said, the devil's going to be in the details, right? So when these regulations are written, that will then help us to understand the direction that the state will go in terms of this program. But now when we talk about the investment piece, especially for entrepreneurs, I'm actually going to answer this differently. So I've gotten to know a few of the MSOs that are currently operating, not only in our state, but of course in other states. And I'll use Curaleaf as an example. One program that they have that I like that they're doing, and I wish that more MSOs would do. So entrepreneurs have a challenge of getting access to capital, right? And we know we don't have a banking system in place for any sort of loans or any sort of support to help these startup businesses. Now, Curaleaf actually has a program called Rooted in Good, and which we Women Grow participate in helping some of our community members get involved. And what they do is they actually get behind these businesses, whether they're product developers or dispensary owner or a smoke lounge that actually opened, I believe, in California. And they're helping to finance and support them by getting their businesses on. Now, some of these operators have already been in business, but they needed an extra support and push to get them to the next level. And to Regina's point earlier is that she's absolutely right. These MSOs have been in the game for quite some time. You know, their head start is so far ahead, it's almost impossible for our communities to catch up. But I do see an opportunity for them to reach back and do exactly what they need to be doing. There are other companies and other MSOs that will be allocating, I believe, some of their cultivation space to some of these businesses that want to begin micro growing and so on, to help them get started, because there aren't enough support systems in place yet. And the regs will have to help us to understand what that will look like to support these startup companies. That's a bigger concern for me, because the average person doesn't realize how much is required to get some of these businesses going. And so when you think about what New York has, which is the co-op that they plan on putting in place, as well as the micro business, micro licenses, which will be the only vertical license holders in this new rollout of licenses that will be given out. I mean, when you think about that, even from a micro level, it still requires a few $1 billion. It's not like it's going to take a couple of $100,000 just to get started. And so I think that's we need to help people understand what this investment looks like. We need to have systems in place that will be able to support these folks that want to enter the industry. And to Regina's point, very specific to Black and Brown communities. Because I think what happens, what time and time again, what we're losing is the true meaning of what the social equity program was really created for. It was for those who were impacted by the war on drugs, right? And so I do understand what Regina said. And I know Regina, I respect her so much. We've had this conversation time and time again. You know, when we talk about MWBEs, you know, oftentimes it goes to other communities and not ours. And so you think about that investment that needs to happen, and the investment that we're looking for is for those communities that have been most impacted. So when I look at California, when I look at Illinois, when I look at Massachusetts, while they didn't have great starts, back to my point earlier, they had to go back and amend what wasn't rolled out properly. And so that's why I pointed to a company like a Curaleaf or one of the other businesses out there, even like a Weed Maps. They're a technology company, a cannabis company, but they get behind a number of these small businesses who need a leg up. Right now, anyone that's looking to enter the industry, if you don't have these few $1 million, I'm not sure or certain, you know, how you would even have that that capital to launch your business.
Absolutely. And I guess one of the things I was thinking in terms of break it down for me, MSOs for the audience. What are MSOs?
Multi-state operators. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay. NightWatchman, go.
Well, I think Gia's hit on the crux of the issue, which is capital formation. And I guess the question that we have in our own community is how can we form the capital we need to participate in this industry? Because as Regina said, there's no day one money in this. And so, you know, while there's the money that's set aside from revenues, there's that 18 to 24 month period where it's got to be made, banked, collected, counted by the state, and then reallocated. And that's a big lead time. How do we find a way? And I want to toss this question back to Ronnie, because I think that's in his wheelhouse. Let's talk about where are the sources of capital? Do we crowdfund? Are there Black venture capitalists? What are the ways that we can look at it, that we can start to get the actual capital needed into these businesses to be able to create the thousands of businesses that Regina is talking about?
You took the words crowdfunding, Black VCs, yes, to both. I think there's plenty of capital out there to be had. I also think there's just kind of no pun intended, homegrown, which is where I would fall into this. My thing is just simply my cousin and I, who's also an entrepreneur. I've just been talking about potential opportunities and pooling our money together, possibly with some close friends. I think as a community, one of the things that Black folks we just has always been disappointing to me. We don't pool together. We don't pool our money together like other communities. So I really am a proponent of just forming an investment group, starting with your close family and friends. Just put the money away and let it grow. And then when you get the right opportunity, you've got some money there, which then that pool of money, no, it's not going to be probably the few million you need to get into a business like this, but it does start. It gets you started. It gets you, it gets you to the table, so to speak. So that's what I would say is a combination of, like you said, of crowdfunding. Black venture capital firms are abundant out there, and then with what I'm doing is just sort of pooling together with my cousin and a few friends.
Gotcha.
All right, so let's dive deeper into that, Ronnie. As an investor, how are you looking at the space? What are you looking for? What types of opportunities? Again, we've got opportunities from seed to sale, and a lot of stops in between. So,
Right.
what are you looking for? A diversified portfolio, or are you looking to do? Are you looking at specific aspects of the industry that you might want to get into?
I lean towards a diversified portfolio, one that has aspects of growth at the top all the way out to dispensary. I like to do good. So like it's one of the greatest joys in life is giving and serving. So I also want to make sure that there is that it's all kind of goes towards the common good. So that I'm not sure exactly how to ensure that. But I would say for me, I'm leaning towards having it be diversified. That said, it seems that the grow process and all of the capital that you need to do that and knowledge that you need to do that is a very, very tall order. It seems to me that from a business standpoint, while I lean like my sort of my idealist, the dreamer in me says, "Oh, I want this diversified portfolio of grow and common good and all." The most likely scenario would be the possibility of having one dispensary, like it would be a family business, like my cousin and I, and maybe a couple of friends. So I think that's probably the most likely scenario for me.
There are a couple of things that some old wives' tales that float around that happen to be sort of like disempowering, in the sense that the folks don't get together, they don't work together, they have a hard time pooling their resources, and I think that I think we need to try to push back or at least show counter examples of that. And most recently, historically, we had the centennial of the Tulsa bombing. And that was clearly an example of Black people putting together an economic powerhouse that was so threatening and had to be destroyed. But there are other examples: Rosewood, Mount Bayou, Mississippi, other places as well. So the kernel is there, and if you look at the business development of at least African American communities under segregation, that they had to put these things together in terms of insurance companies, construction companies. So it's only when we get up to the quote unquote integrated North that there's been less and less of that kind of autonomous and independent business development. But I think we need to break through that illusion to the point where we realize that we do have that capacity. One of the things that these MSOs have is that they have the capital to pull together think tanks to look at and frame out, what it takes to get involved in these particular niches. And I think that, we need to at least try to develop that kind of scenario amongst the African American community or any other community of color to look at, say, what specifically are the requirements for developing a consumption lounge or a retail outlet? What would be the ideal resource mix necessary to put that together, and to put together these studies that would present on some of these entrepreneurs with say turnkey applications. And so, look, we need this capital for this. These are the regulations. Here's how you can go it, and it's sort of like a roadmap to participation. I think at this point, that's something that could be helpful.
Nice. Regina, I know that you're going to have to depart, but I need to hear some thoughts of what the doctor has just said. Also, I know that when HBA was having the forums, and Gia, you'll probably also comment on this, in terms of the many different tiers that are available for, that should be available for investment, some of the quote-unquote low-hanging fruit. Can you comment on some of the lower investments that might be available to entrepreneurs wanting to get into the space?
Well, from what I'm hearing, the delivery licenses might be more affordable. The other ones, I mean, the consumption lounges,
those are tricky.
Say
Yeah.
that, Gia?
Those are tricky.
They are.
They're grandfather laws. I'm sorry, Regina, because I knew you were trying to find the words. Those are tricky.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We're a vertical city. If you're looking at New York City specifically, I'm sorry, sis, but I'm going to come in and give you that help here. We're a vertical city with grandfather laws in place, especially for smoke, period, which is why our current medical patients who are part of the medical marijuana program aren't able to consume cannabis in any of our housing projects, right? Our city housing. And so when you think about consumption lounges, where exactly are we putting that? If dispensaries cannot be located near schools, churches, or playgrounds, where exactly are consumption lounges? Because currently our bars are located in those very areas.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and we already have state legislation in terms of schools and or churches. So you see a similar problem that will occur with adult use. Okay, gotcha.
Hi, Regina.
No, I mean, that's just what I was thinking about, the zoning regs. And you just laid it out. I mean, that's going to be problematic. I mean, at least in New York City.
Wow. Okay. I guess. Well, Ronnie, you hear this? That is definitely not going to be a slam dunk here in New York, huh?
Sounds like it's not a slam dunk.
Can I just say something? I'm sorry, because I don't want people who are listening to be discouraged by this. Okay. But at the same time, it does require some work. It does require some research. Those of us in the industry didn't just get up one day and decide, oh, we're going to be in this, and everything started working out. Whether people like the MRTA or not, I mean, it took years to even get that far, because what we saw prior to that, and Regina can agree with me, sucked. It was awful. We wouldn't have had a pinky toe in the game. Right. And so now when you think about these ancillary services, which, I'm a part of that as well. And yes, picks and shovels are very important to this industry. But if you're thinking of being a New York City operator within that space, delivery to consumers is a great way to do that. Absolutely. And it's a more affordable way of entry. But when I hear people talk about consumption lounges, it concerns me, because that is probably one of the more challenging, because I think that is something we're going to see maybe outside of the city. But then when you think about outside of the city, where are those zip codes? Like, what is the affordability of leasing or renting or buying, buildings? So there are other areas of which that people can invest in this industry by being our accountants. We don't have enough Black accountants in cannabis. We don't have enough Black attorneys in cannabis. We don't have enough communications and marketing to service our businesses. But just as we're pushing that, we do need Black and brown people in plant touching businesses. And what I'm seeing across the industry is that they are pushing towards picks and shovels, but I believe that there will be an imbalance if we are not touching all aspects of this industry.
I have a question.
So
why it seems to me that the delivery part of it is probably the most dangerous aspect of it. And that seems to be the piece of it that has trickled down into the Black and brown community. Am I wrong? Is it not very dangerous and risky?
Dangerous how?
Just seems like if you're out there, you're delivering, you have huge risk with insurance. That's huge cost with insurance. You'd have huge risk of safety and just people being in harm's way. It just does it. Educate me. To me, it just seems like it is not the safest aspect of this business.
Well, I mean, I think there's certainly security issues in all aspects of the chain. But I think what you also have to look at the trends. Look at Amazon. Look at what's happening with grocery delivery. We've gone to a delivery-based economy, and so. It's funny because MedMen tried to come in with a model to say we want to be the Apple Store of dispensaries, and I don't think that model has shown that it's necessarily effective. I believe delivery is part of the future of the business. People want on-demand services. They want to be able to order what they want from a menu, and they want to have it delivered to their door. This is happening in pharmacies. Pharmacies now are going to delivery. Medicine can come straight to your door. So why not, cannabis? So I think it's a big opportunity in delivery. I think that we've also seen in Massachusetts where they made delivery part of their social equity program and made sure that piece was slated toward social equity participants. So I think that there is definitely an opportunity in the delivery space, but I also think that there's other things that we're not looking at. So once the plant is grown, in many respects, it needs to be extracted, it needs to be tested, there needs to be transportation, secure transportation. We haven't even talked about edibles and topicals. There are so many new products that are coming.
It's part of the manufacturing.
Right, right. And I think we need to start to expand our scope and start to look at these opportunities. I think in particular in the edible space, I've talked to a number of small entrepreneurs that want to get into that space. There's beauty products, there's topicals. And so I think in those spaces, we have an opportunity to also unlock our creativity, where when we have an opportunity to take the raw materials and create something out of it, that gives us more of an advantage vis-a-vis trying to compete on the growing level. We may find that New York ultimately doesn't compete in growing, because at some point in time, if there's a national legalization, the states that such as California and Oregon are going to have a distinct advantage in terms of growing. But our advantages in New York are consumption. We are one of the biggest markets for consumption. Our advantages are branding. Our advantages are our creativity, certainly culinary, edible, and then the social aspects of New York. And so I do think that there are some opportunities in consumption lounges, but it's for people who have the skill set. I certainly know one entrepreneur in particular who's developing a model for consumption lounges. I have a feeling that there's an opportunity to be successful because we are community-based people. We like socializing, and I think there'll be an advantage for people who understand the culture of cannabis that's going to be developed, because the culture is changing as a result of legalization. So there are a lot. I think we can expand our view of what the opportunities are, but we still have to find ways to support, support our entrepreneurs who want to get into the space. So we only have a couple of minutes left, so I want to give everybody a chance to just give us some closing thoughts and also just share information on where people can reach you. So we're going to start off again with you, Gia.
Sure. So one of the partnerships we're pretty proud of is we recently joined a pool partnership with Medgar Evers College. And so they launched their minor program, and I've been working with MEC probably since late 2019, early 2020. And, so while they started out with this minor program, there are plans for multiple, I would say expanding the minor program into certificate program, and further further courses, and then eventually, hopefully we'll see a major, and that's exciting to see that program launch, not only in my hometown of Brooklyn, but in Crown Heights. And I've said this before, that is a neighborhood that definitely was the battleground, on the war on drugs. And so those are the types of initiatives that we want to see. Now, while Crown Heights has seen its change and has gone through, some parts are rather gentrified, but there are still people in the community that are looking for that education and access to information. I know one of the programs that they are looking to launch down the line is the legacy program, right? So for those who are operators in the legacy program who are looking to enter into the adult use. And so I believe we'll begin to see more and more of that with not only other CUNYs, but, just other city and state schools, not only in New York, but across the country. And so, for those who are tuning in, follow us at Women Grow or across all of our social media channels. And again, I'm encouraged by the two appointees. I agree with Regina. I look forward to the rest of the selections. And more importantly, I'm looking forward to seeing these regulations. And I think people need to understand their voices can be heard, because when these regs are released, that is not the final, sign off. You actually get to contribute and give the feedback. And I think that is what our community needs to do. We need to speak up more and show up more for these community meetings, these lending our voice to contributing to these laws that are being put in place. We have to show up. Otherwise, we will be left out and counted out.
Gotcha. Good one. Regina, do tell. And also, I want to know, Regina, since the last time we had the nice little talk in your offices with the growers, any new thoughts in terms of bringing them back, and also seeing how that interaction with Black and Brown communities is actually going to happen?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we'll be partnering with and offering workshops and webinars to our community and anyone else who's interested in learning as much as they possibly can in the coming months. So we're in the process of working out those arrangements.
Okay. Good. And you, of course, are located 275 Malcolm X Boulevard, 212-665-7010. You like that?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Doc, how you doing? Before you bounce and go to the West Coast, while we have you here, do tell.
No, well, our organization has grown up because we realized that there was a real gap in the education of medical providers regarding medicinal benefits. So we've been trying to fill that gap for the past 20 years. And we are now reaching out to a number of educational institutions like Medgar Evers, Florida Agricultural Mechanical University, Morehouse colleges, in terms of ways in which we can utilize our clinical resources and our clinical material trainings in terms of partnership with these. We think that it's critical that healthcare providers be educated about medicinal cannabis, but also that the community in general be educated about the benefits of medicinal cannabis and the opportunities in the cannabis industry per se, which is why I was really glad to see Medgar Evers developing this cannabis studies minor. And I'd like to talk to Gia more about that participation. We had to speak. I spoke with Vickiana earlier this week about partnership opportunities. So I think it's really critical in terms of educating the community about the change in the law, particularly around the legalization issues and the criminal justice issues, but also about the economic opportunities. And we know that an educated consumer can make demands on the providers that can actually help enforce those social equity provisions that are in the law so that they won't be, as Regina says, bamboozled.
Absolutely. Ron, closing thoughts.
Yeah, well, I just want to thank all of you for the knowledge that you've shared with me. And I'd say with that, it's important that listeners and people who are interested do some of the research that has been suggested and do the work that I'm just starting to do. And today is just another big learning day for me. I think with continued cultural tolerance, legalization, and just all this knowledge that's coming about, it's going to be a good space for entrepreneurs to watch. So
Beautiful.
yeah, it's going to be a positive space.
Gotcha. NightWatchman, take us home.
Well, thank you for all of the panelists for sharing your insights and experience. This has been Soul Lounge Primetime. We are live on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Also live on our YouTube and Facebook channels. You can always find us on Monday night, 7 p.m. on the radio, 8 p.m. on video. Thanks for joining us, and see you next week.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. Excellent show.